What's up, everyone? This is Ryan checking in with you all tonight on the Walk It Off Sports YouTube channel. And I got to tell you, I'm so excited to kind of get started with Mike on this little endeavor that he dreamed up. Loved just the thought, the idea of kind of getting on here and sharing opinions, kind of interacting with you all, getting your thoughts on what we have to say, and, just kind of having some, fun little back and forth banter about something that me and Mike, share in common, and which is our love of sports. And so, knowing Mike now for a little more than 4 years, used to work together and just kind of hit it off right away. Probably because of our mutual love for those dogs that play up in Athens, GA, but we also are big fans of the Braves as well, and just sports in general. So this is an idea he dreamed up. He said, hey, you want to be a part of it? I said, let's do it. Let's see what we can make happen. So really excited to get started. This is my first video on here, and lots of opinions, of course, about many things in the world of sports. A little background about myself: born and raised in Georgia. So diehard, as I mentioned, University of Georgia fan, Atlanta Braves fan, Atlanta Falcons fan, Atlanta Hawks fan. Thrashers back in the day when they had a hockey team. If they get another one again, I'll be right in there with them again. Die hard as much as I can be. And also, Atlanta United too, soccer. I don't know a ton about soccer, but I can talk a little bit about it. Super excited to have our boy Miguel Almiron back there with the team. We got a good win the other night. So all you soccer fans, I can talk a little bit about that too. So, but again, super excited to be part of this channel with Mike. Great guy. It's going to be a lot of fun. Again, we share love for the Bulldogs, but we're not always going to agree on everything, and that's okay. And we know you guys aren't always going to agree with us either. So, but what we do want to try to foster is, some, little back and forth. You get your opinion on what we have to say, check us if we're wrong, that kind of thing. And, be respectful. We'll be respectful to y'all, and, have some fun with this and kind of see where it goes. But lots of things that, you can kind of talk about in the world of sports every day. I'll be checking in more often with, shorter videos and, topics that come up, kind of give my opinion, thoughts on that, kind of like Mike recently did, with some moves that his Bills are making, and just kind of, we'll discuss them together sometimes, or just kind of get on here by ourselves every now and then. But, really with football just recently wrapping up, the Eagles manhandling the Chiefs there. A little surprisingly, I kind of figured the Eagles were the better team and would probably come out on top, but just you never know with Mahomes. But they kind of made that look a little easier than I thought it was going to be. But football season now, kind of in the rear view mirror. But again, they always are, talking about the next thing, and the next thing coming up is the draft. And so one thing, as an Atlanta Falcons fan, that I, have kind of dealt with ever since I can remember, and my first real memory of watching the Falcons was the early 90s. Deion Sanders, Chris Miller, those guys, Scott Case flying around making, plays in the defensive backfield, Brian Jordan, those guys out there, being the Falcons. That's, kind of been living and dying with them ever since then, right? And as I got a little bit older, I started forming opinions about how the team was doing, the direction they were going, the decisions they were making, whether it be in the front office, hires, or, personnel-wise, draft picks. I've kind of started taking a little more umbrage, so to speak, with their draft decisions. Now, I can talk about the Falcons, in many different directions. I'm going to try to keep this a little more geared towards their history a little bit, and their more recent history in draft picks, because that is coming up. You're going to hear a lot of people with their mock drafts coming up over the next couple of months. There's going to be a million of them before the day actually comes, and none of them are going to be all the way right. But, we have typically a pretty good idea of where the Falcons are going to lean in the draft. And in the most recent future, and I'm talking probably the last 12 to 15 years, in my opinion, and that's what I'm here to share, we have neglected the side of the ball that wins championships, the defensive side of the ball, and at the same time ruined our best player ever, Matt Ryan's, chance at a Super Bowl. Now, we'll circle back to that a little bit because obviously we had a chance, but that's a different story, maybe for a different day. Probably touch on it a little bit here tonight. But Matt Ryan, and if anyone tells you differently, is hands down the greatest Falcon ever, right? This team has been around for 59 seasons, started in 1966. They had never had back-to-back winning seasons until Matt Ryan became a Falcon. And I know he doesn't do everything by himself. So, there were some teams where we had some decent defenses. We had some pieces here and there. But we'll break down a little bit about their defensive rankings here shortly for you. But some people like to, yell and scream till they're blue in the face about, people that played in the 80s and 90s or people that played in the early 2000s. And, they're wrong. Matt Ryan, greatest Falcon ever, hands down. You're not going to change my mind on that. You can have a different opinion, but, he statistically, as far as passing yards go, top 10 ever. Not just Falcon, just ever, as in quarterback. So, he holds many Atlanta Falcons passing records that would take a while to be broken. And, hey, honestly, I hope Michael Penix Jr. breaks every single one of them. I do. Because, again, ever since I can remember, since I was about 7 years old, I've been living and dying with the Falcons. And unfortunately, most of what I've been doing is dying with the Falcons. So, again, I have some notes here, so I may, kind of refer to those every now and then because I can't remember all of our missteps along the way right off the top of my head. But it comes pouring back to me once I kind of start looking at these notes again. But again, the team since 1966, we have an overall record of 398 wins, 512 losses, and 6 ties. We are also only 10-14 in the playoffs ever. 24 playoff games in 59 seasons. We are one of only 12 teams, joining, unfortunately, Mike's beloved Bills as well, that has never won a Super Bowl. And some of those teams are going to get passes because you have your Jaguars, who've only been around for, since the early mid-90s. You have your Texans, who haven't been around for long, right? Some of those guys get a pass. We've been around since basically the start of the Super Bowl, right? And have only played in 2 Super Bowls. We've played in 4 NFC Championship games in 59 seasons. We don't want to talk too much about the most recent Super Bowl that we had. But, it happened. And it's the worst loss in sports history, right? Not just football, not just Super Bowl history, sports history, right? It is. There were numerous things that should have gone differently in that game that I 100% think we would have won by doing just 1 or 2 of them, right? But, they, for whatever reason, Shanahan and Dan Quinn and, Matt Ryan didn't audible or, to a run play or something like we needed to, or, he decided to, go quick, even though, sure, going by what the coaches, told him to do. But I almost feel like, he should take a little bit of the onus as well, because it's like, hey, look, if we run a little bit more of this time off while we're up really big, it's going to make it a little bit harder for these Patriots to come back. You have the GOAT over there on the other sideline, and if we can keep him over there and off the field, it's going to better our chances a little bit. So let's, wind this clock down a little bit. But we didn't. But anyway, don't want to dive too much into that, as I mentioned. What I want to focus on, like I said, is kind of a little bit of our draft history and kind of a little bit of the front office. So I mentioned, that Super Bowl and, who's to blame, right? The blame can be thrown around to a few different people. But I'm getting to the point now where Arthur Blank has owned this team since 2002, right? And all along the way, the decisions for leadership of the Falcons that he ultimately makes have been highly questionable at times. And really now it's pretty worrisome because it's like, well, he's not going to sell the team, right? And so there's never going to be anyone that's going to say, hey, maybe you should step back a little bit, because he keeps hiring all these, seemingly, in my opinion, these yes men, right? Yeah, they have some experience. He started out by hiring Rich McKay, right? And Rich McKay was the general manager for about 5 seasons, I think, 4 or 5 seasons. And, didn't hit on much. So instead of firing him, he decided to just give him a different position, right, within the organization. And then hired Dimitroff, which seemed, right, hey, he's a Patriots guy. Patriots are rolling right now. They're winning all the Super Bowls. Let's bring them in, see if they can get, a squad built here like they have in New England that's winning championships, right? Okay. I was on board. Everything was hunky-dory, right? Started off good, right? Started, great. And then, things started kind of petering along, right? And, injuries would happen, or, just some bad luck here and there. It happens to all teams, right? But Dimitroff kind of started souring on the fan base, and lo and behold, there was no moves made, right? He's still there, still calling the shots. And finally, after 2020, he gets canned. So he's there for like 13 years, right? 13 seasons, 12 or 13 seasons. Again, played in 1 Super Bowl in that time, right? I mean, I'm not Mr. Fire guy after 1 or 2 or 3 seasons, typically, right? Especially not a general manager. But if you've only made it to 1 Super Bowl because that was, near the end of his tenure, right? Only made it to 1 Super Bowl in 13 seasons. Like, in my opinion, you need to be at least making it, if you're making it consistently 2 or 3 games into the playoffs every year, even if you don't reach the Super Bowl, fine. Let's give the GM a little more leash, right? Let's give the coach a little more leash, right? Obviously, some things are working. Just try to make a few more tweaks here and there, that kind of thing. But we've only played in 24 playoff games in our 59 season existence, right? So, obviously we weren't 1 or 2 tweaks away, right? And one of my biggest issues that I have with Arthur Blank and Rich McKay is their presence in the draft war room on draft night, right? More so Arthur Blank than Rich McKay, right? Because Arthur Blank, he's a billionaire, right? He does a lot of great things for the city of Atlanta, builds hospitals. Some people say, well, he should be doing that, right? Hey, maybe you're right? I'm not going to disagree with you there. But he doesn't have to, right? But and he built Home Depot, right? One of the founders of Home Depot. So obviously, putting together, something that is going to grow and do well, he's got some experience with that. So I don't want to really poo-poo on that. But To me, from what it looks like from an outsider, is he wants just, in that first round every year, he just wants a shiny new toy, right? He wants a sexy pick, right? Doesn't care what the need of the team is, right? He wants somebody that's going to put butts in seats and sell jerseys, right? A big name, like a big splash, right? And hey, lucky for him, we usually have a losing season. We've had 7 in a row, by the way. Since our last Super Bowl, we haven't had a winning season. 7 losing seasons in a row. So we're usually getting a pretty good draft pick, which means we're getting a bright, new, shiny toy, right? But the problem most of the time is that bright, shiny new toy does not fit the needs of the team. And most of the time, it's an offensive weapon, right? If your bright, shiny new toy with some defensive pieces, like, I don't know, like a Nolan Smith or Jalen Carter or Jordan Davis, you know, hey, I'd be all for those guys, right? Not just because they're Georgia Dogs, but because they're now also, not only are they national champions, they're now Super Bowl champions, right? And hey, they all play on the defensive side of the ball. And guess who's like one of the worst rushing teams in the NFL, year in and year out? The Atlanta Falcons. And I have some stats. And as I mentioned, I'm going to look back at some notes here periodically, just kind of make sure I'm telling you what, is correct, right? So, I touched on it a little bit. And while I am a dog fan, and I would love to see some of the elite dogs play for the Atlanta Falcons, I'm not going to sit here and say, you got to take this guy just because he's an Atlanta Falcon, or because he was a Georgia Bulldog, right? But at the same time, right, over the past 4 or 5 years, arguably, the Georgia Bulldogs are one of the best teams, if not the best team, to draft a player from, right? As is evident, again, by the Philadelphia Eagles winning a Super Bowl. We've had multiple people play in Super Bowls for many years straight. I don't know how many years straight, but every year there are multiple Georgia Bulldogs. Man, I wish there was multiple Falcons. Multiple Georgia Bulldogs playing on the biggest stage of the year, right? And somebody wins, right? Chiefs had Mecole Harding and Hardman and Malik Herring, and we know about all the Eagles, who they have, and the Patriots won with Sony Michel and David Andrews and Malcolm Mitchell, and the 49ers go and play, and they had Chris Conley, and they had Charlie Werner, and all these guys aren't first and second round draft picks, but the Atlanta Falcons, who are a little more than an hour away. Their stadium is a little more than an hour away from Athens, Georgia, right? In their existence, 59 years, they have never drafted a University of Georgia player in either the first or the second round. They've drafted some guys, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh round, whatever the case may be, here and there, kind of sprinkled in, right? Even recently, drafted a couple guys, signed Charlie Warner, signed defensive end from the Giants, blanking on his name now, but Lorenzo Carter, right? Brought Todd Gurley in a few years ago, right? Kind of at the tail end of his career, unfortunately, even though he was still relatively young. Everyone knew his knee was shot, right? And he was kind of done, right? But we bring him in, and, the rest, kind of speaks for itself. Love Todd Gurley, but there was just nothing special about him at that point anymore, unfortunately. So, kind of mentioned here a little bit about the Falcons draft history, and I'm not going to go all the way back to the beginning of time, but I will kind of go back a little bit to roughly around 20, I'd say 2019 is kind of a good time to kind of start start talking about the most recent draft picks, because again, since our last Super Bowl, we've not had a winning season, right? And primarily the issues there have been on the defensive side of the football. For instance, so since 2002, since Arthur Blank was there, I'm just going to rattle straight through from 2002 through 2024, the season just wrapped up, our defensive rankings, right? We were 8th, 30th, 14, 18, 15, 29, 11, 14, 5th, 18, 5th again, 27, 27, 14, 27, 8th, our Super Bowl year, 25th, 23rd, 19th, 29th, 23rd, 18th, and 23rd. So since the Super Bowl, 7 losing seasons, right? The best we were ranked defensively was 18th. Had a 19th, and then after that, some 23s in there, a 25th, and a 29th. So to me, that screams we need to address the defensive side of the football. So let's get into a little bit about the draft picks that have been made since 2019. And I threw out a few names that we could have had instead. Now, granted, I'm not going to sit here and kind of crap on all of the draft picks that we've made, because some were necessary and some are good pieces. I'm not denying that, right? But again, when year in and year out, you're fielding one of the worst defenses in the NFL and you're not addressing it in the draft, like, someone has got to come in and scream, what are we doing? Like, why do we keep doing the same thing? I mean, it's a definition of insanity, right? Same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. It's not happening, right? It's 2019. We had 2 picks in the first round. Drafted 2 offensive linemen. They have been 2 very good offensive linemen, Lindstrom and McGarry, right? These guys were needed. So I'm not poo-pooing on those picks, so to speak, really. I will say we have held on to Mr. Matthews for far too long at one of the tackle positions. I thank him for his service, but it's time to move on. It's been time to move on for a while. And just like we did with Dimitrov, we just keep holding on and hoping. But anyway, I digress on Mr. Matthews. Some players we could have had on the defensive side specifically: Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, Jeffrey Simmons, Montez Sweat, and Byron Murphy. Those guys would have looked good on the defense there. 2020, we addressed the defensive side of the ball. Yay! Now, granted, I know, again, this is my opinion, right? Yours can differ greatly. That's fine. To me, drafting a cornerback in the first round is a no-go. Unless your name is Deion Sanders or Darrelle Revis. That's like the only 2 exceptions in my mind. That is one of the hardest transitions to make from college to the NFL position-wise in my mind. Because in college, right, if you're the guy, if you're the number 1 DB, great, right? You're facing off against number 1 wide receivers, right, most of the time, depending on what you play. Like if you're playing, man, and you're sticking with that man, no matter what side of the field he goes on, fine. Sometimes you're not, right? You're also sometimes not facing guys that will ever make it in the NFL. You're also sometimes facing, Tennessee Tech guys and again, not to poo-poo on Tennessee Tech guys, but you get what I'm saying, right? Division II guys, right? Guys that are never going to sniff the NFL. When you get to the NFL, not only are you facing NFL guys every week, if you're the man, right, you're facing number 1 NFL wide receivers every week, right? And they don't let you touch receivers as a DB in the NFL. The NFL wants points scored, right? If you don't get your head around even if you haven't touched a guy, they're probably going to throw a flag for pass interference, right? And we all know some teams, Kansas City Chiefs, get a few more calls than the other guys, right? Or no calls. They get a few more of those too, as was evident when the Falcons played the Chiefs earlier this year. But I digress. Not exactly what I'm talking about. But anyway, we drafted A.J. Terrell, right? So, out of Clemson, my South Carolina fans, hey, South Carolina peeps, sorry. Clemson fans, hello. A.J. Terrell. Seemingly, a solid pick, right? We were picking 16th that year. A.J. Terrell's there. Hey, defensive guy, we got a need. Let's fill it. Let's take him. Let's go, right? Well, in 5 years, and what I want from my DB is to be forcing turnovers, right? Pass deflections, turnovers. I don't get too caught up in, well, they're throwing away from them. They're, avoiding them. He's got them on lockdown. He hasn't given up this, any touchdowns in this many games, blah, 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 whatever the case may be. Granted, that's good. That is a stat that, I probably should have looked up on A.J. Terrell. I'm not sure how he's doing there. But again, in my mind, I want my DBs forcing turnovers, right? So interceptions, forced fumbles, fumble recoveries. They're making game-changing plays, right? That's what I want, especially from a first-round pick. That's your number one cornerback. Has been since 2020, right? So in 5 seasons, he has totaled 6 interceptions, 4 forced fumbles, and 1 fumble recovery. So that's 2 on average turnovers he's creating or recovering a year. He's been relatively healthy, so it's not like he's missed a ton of games, which again would be another problem anyway. I mean, I know you can't predict health, but again, he's had a lot of chances, right? Just not cutting it for me, right? So, if you look at some of the guys that we could have had instead of A.J. Terrell in 2020, and when I say could have had, I mean these guys were taken after our picks, right? So they were there on the board when it came up. It's not like, oh, well, Justin Jefferson went in 2020. We picked 16th and he went 15th. No, we could have had Justin Jefferson in 2020, right? And granted, you're going to say, well, he's an offensive player, right? I get it, right? He is, yeah. But, when you have some of these guys, and there's quite a few other offensive players here that I've named, but when you have some of these caliber offensive guys available out there, it's like, well, maybe we should just go ahead and take one of these guys like Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Ayuk, Jordan Love. We were at a time where we could use a different quarterback. Michael Pittman, Patrick Queen, he looked good on that defense. DeAndre Swift, Georgia Bulldog. Xavier McKinney, T. Higgins, Antoine Winfield Jr., he looked good in that defensive backfield. Jonathan Taylor, right? We needed a running back. Could have had Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift. But no. We went A.J. Terrell. 2021. We took Kyle Pitts, 4th overall. We took Richie Grant, 40th overall, 2nd round. Who is a DB. He's a safety, right? Again, hasn't really done anything in his time in the Falcons. But we took Kyle Pitts 4th. There'll be another video about Kyle Pitts in the future, so I won't touch on it too much other than he just looks like he doesn't want to be there anymore. And I can tell you most fans don't want him there either. But I'm going to rattle off the next 8 picks after Kyle Pitts in the 2021 draft. Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddell, Waddell, I'm not sure. Doesn't matter. You know what I'm talking about. Penei Sewell, J.C. Horn, Pat Surtain Jr., or the 2nd. I don't know the difference. I think it's the same, but some like to go by 2nd, so 2nd. Devontae Smith, Justin Fields, Micah Parsons. Oh, and we also could have had Azeez Ojulari before, instead of taking Richie Grant. But anyway. Defensive side of the ball there, I named J.C. Horn, Pat Surtain, and Micah Parsons, and Azeez Ojulari, right? Would have been great picks. But we went Kyle Pitts. Yeah. More on him in the future. 2022. Now, granted, we took Drake London. I like that pick. Drake has proven himself time and again. He's a legit pick. He's a legit wide receiver in the NFL. I'm glad we have him, right? Then we took somebody named Arnold Ebiketie. I'm not sure. He's a defensive guy. 35th, right? Here's some guys we could have had. Mostly on the defensive side of the ball. Jordan Davis, Kyle Hamilton, Quay Walker, Jermaine Johnson II, Devontae Wyatt, Devin Lloyd, Greg Karlaftis. In round 3, we took someone named D'Angelo Malone out of Western Kentucky. We could have had Nakobe Dean, who went on the very next pick. Yeah. Let's move on to 2023. Again, we took Bijan Robinson. Fantastic pick. Don't get me wrong. I love Bijan Robinson. He was our offense last year, right? But at the time, we had just taken another running back, and he had done great. He'd rushed for 1,000 yards in his rookie year. So it wasn't a need. It was a flashy, shiny new toy for Arthur Blank to play with, right? It was somebody that's going to sell jerseys and put butts in seats, right? Bijan Robinson was the 8th pick. Jalen Carter was the 9th pick. Will McDonald, the 4th, was there. Brian Brissy was there. Nolan Smith was there for the taking. We got none of them, right? And some people are going to say, oh, you can go back and do this every year, hindsight 2020, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But that's not my point. We are neglecting the needs. And every year, the needs are the same because we're neglecting them. We're not going out and signing guys. Like, to me, if you're going to address the defensive side of the ball in free agency, it needs to be cornerback. Guys that are established in the league. They've put up stats. They know how to play the game, right? 3, 4, 5 years in the league. Hey, bring that guy in. You lock down this side, bring you in, you lock down the other side. Let's go. Darius Slay was a free agent not too long ago from Georgia. Didn't go to the University of Georgia, but from the state of Georgia, right? Everybody's talking, hey, Falcons should go get Darius Slay. Let's go get Darius Slay. I don't know if we legitimately made any kind of play for him or not. He's now a Super Bowl champion, right? Now, we did go get Jesse Bates, right? He's been fantastic. Fantastic. The 2 years he's been with the Falcons, I believe it is, fantastic. Best guy on the field on defense, not named Grady Jarrett. I know Grady Jarrett had some injuries. It's kind of on the down slope of his career a little bit. But that's what I'm talking about. Like, that, he was an established guy on the defensive end, secondary, right? Go out. You don't even really have to scout these guys, right? You got the tape. You see what they've done in the NFL, right? Their actions have spoken for them. Go get them. Bring them in. They'll make plays. Jesse Bates has been making plays all over the field ever since he's been a Falcon. Won numerous games for the Falcons in the past couple years. It's not rocket science that we're doing here, right? 2024, we take Michael Penix again. Granted, verdict will be out on him, for another year or so. High hopes for him, obviously. Again, I want him to beat all of Matt Ryan's records, right? I want him to be the greatest Falcon ever. But I want him to have some Super Bowl rings on his hand as well. Both hands. I want him to need both hands for Super Bowl rings. And then 35th overall, we selected someone named Rook or Horo. Probably just because we wanted to try to pronounce his name. But here's some guys we could have had, right? Brock Bowers, Latu, Dallas Turner, Amarius Mims, Jared Verse, Chop Robinson, Cooper DeJean, Super Bowl champion, Kamari Lassiter, and Braden Fisk. Also could have had Bo Nix, but I really didn't want Bo Nix. But he had a pretty good season. Maybe that was, maybe some of that had to do with Sean Payton's offense and him just being a good fit. I don't know. I'm sure, obviously that had something to do with it, right? But yeah. So that's, in a nutshell, over the past, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 6 drafts. Just constantly neglecting the needs for bright, shiny toys. And again, like I said, McGarry, Lindstrom, Penix, Robinson, London. These are all guys that should be Falcons for a long time and will contribute, hopefully, greatly to the team's success, right? But I went over those defensive rankings, and those defensive rankings are not going to win you championships. They're not going to win you divisions. We've only won 6 divisions in our existence, and 2 of them were the NFC West. Yeah, Atlanta teams used to play in the West. Braves, National League West. Falcons, NFC West, right? Huge 49ers rivals. I used to remember Dion and Jerry Rice beating on each other all the time back in the 90s. Like, why are you guys punching each other in the helmet? Like, that's ridiculous. Come on. But anyway, yeah. We won 2 NFC West. The first one being in 1980. So we went from 1966 to 1980 before we won a division. We didn't win another one until 1998 when we went to our first Super Bowl. Since then, we've won 4 NFC South divisions, right? It's just not cutting it. It's not cutting it, right? One other thing I want to touch on about the draft. 2012 draft. And this draft, in my mind, should have gotten Dimitroff fired after 2014. I'll tell you why here in a second. Right away. Now, granted, 2012, we did not have a first-round pick, right? We only had 5 picks in the whole draft. We had a second-round pick, and I don't think we had like a 5th-round pick or something like that. But anyway, all 5 of those picks were out of the NFL after 2 seasons. Not with another team, not, second or third string on the Falcons, not on a practice squad. They were out of the NFL altogether. All 5 picks. Done. 2 years or less. I think Peter Kahns might have been the one that lasted the longest. That right there should have been the end of Thomas Dimitroff. Right there. After 2014, when none of those guys were in the league anymore, he should have been gone. But he was around for another 6 years. And you know who else is still there making decisions for some reason? Rich McKay as well. Why? Makes no sense to me. And I wanted to go back and touch on a little bit about, when our defenses actually looked pretty good ranking wise, right? We had a 5th place, defense in 2010. We had the 19th hardest schedule. A 5th place defense in 2012. We had the 23rd hardest schedule. So yeah, they made some plays, looked pretty good, but really, what's the competition, right? The level is not there. Now, granted, in 2017, when we made it to the Super Bowl, and we had the 8th best defense, we had the toughest schedule, right? So, that was a great year, fantastic year. But everything's just gone downhill since, and nothing's been addressed. Hardly nothing. Next to nothing's been addressed, right? 2024, we had the easiest streak to schedule. Just kind of wanted to throw that out there. Based on the opponent's win percentage from previous year. But yeah. So, I say all that to say a few things, right? A, Arthur Blank, we all know he's going to own the team until he passes, right? I'm not wishing that on anyone, right? Like I said, seemingly good man. He does a lot for Atlanta, the city. Things he probably should do. But another thing he should do is step out of the way, right? Quit trying to be like your good buddy Jerry Jones, right? Jerry hasn't played for an NFC championship in 30 years, right? Jerry is way too meddling, and so is Arthur Blank, right? Have the guts to fire the people that are just yes men, right? Quit hiring yes men. Hire people that are going to question you and push you to change and be better, right? Not somebody that's going to stroke your ego, right? Address needs. It's simple, right? It's, we're beating a dead horse here. Just address the needs and let them go play. And maybe, just maybe, draft a dog or two. And with that, I'm going to walk it off. Have a good night.